Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Podcast, episode 8. I'm here with Barry.
Yeah, boy, here once again.
That's right, we've made it 8 episodes in, and we have no intention to stop talking about board games because they keep releasing new ones.
More than we can even cover.
It's true. We have to be picky. So we've picked out a few that we think are newsworthy, worth mentioning, worth talking about.
Worth letting you know.
Exactly. This is the cutting edge board game news that you come here for. And the top headline is more Root.
Root.
Do you like Root, Barry?
I quite like Root. I've not played enough to really get to full grips with it. I was somewhat against Root to begin with because of the full asymmetry. And I was like, I don't want to learn 4 factions just to play a game. And then eventually, broken down once everybody else had played, they kind of knew it. So like, I'm just going to learn my guys. You guys know what yours do. And then it was quite enjoyable. Played it an okay amount. Base game with some of the expansions, lizards, moles. Played cats, birds, the little guy, vagabond.
The vagabond, yep.
And played in games with. I played Corvids as well. So yeah, I played it quite a bit. Like I quite like it. I don't own it, and I don't really feel like I want to own it.
Well, I do own Root, and I've got all of Root, and almost all of the expansions, with some minor exceptions, are more factions, more asymmetrical factions doing different things. So the new expansion has not yet even appeared on Kickstarter, has it? It is pending, coming to Kickstarter.
Frogs and bats.
Frogs and bats, yeah. That's all we really know because that's what's on the art for the image.
I think frogs do stuff with giving people cards, is what I'm under the impression of. I'm not sure about bats, but that's something new.
Well, the Vagabond does that, though. The Vagabond gives people cards to generate alliance with them.
True, and I guess the river folks, or we're the merchant guys that
the otters.
You buy cards from, yeah.
The otters, yeah.
So I suppose it's not that unique. But.
So one of the more interesting things they did, I think, in the earlier new editions was the second deck. They had released a whole new deck of cards that replaced the original deck. And I thought that was a great way to change things up. And that's one of the things I like about the general approach to expanding Root has just been more variety, more variability. There is new rules overhead by dint of the fact that it is asymmetrical factions and every new faction presents a new rule set that you have to learn for that faction. But they've never sort of fundamentally changed or expanded the rules in a significant way. One could argue with the hirelings and the landmarks, they added a little bit more rules overhead, but I also don't know anyone that particularly cares for those expansions. So,
fair.
But I like Root. I talked about the game I played of it, I think a couple podcasts ago, 3 or 4 podcasts ago, with the Lord of the Hundreds and the Badgers. I can't remember what they're called. The Steel Legion, Iron Legion, something like that.
Yeah.
But that was great. I'm always happy for more Root factions. I think you have to play a lot of Root to probably need more factions at this stage. But it is a game that has become quite well cemented in one of my groups. And I know that if I put it down, I'll always get a 4 or 5 player game and most people will know how to play. And I think that does Root a great service, is that most people now know how to play because it's become so sort of a part of the hobby culture. And so it's just easy to get to the table.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Anything that gets played is a good game, right?
Well, exactly right. The most important thing is getting the game to the table.
Yeah, there's no point having the best game in the world if nobody wants to play it.
So we can have a look at the Frogs and the Bats in a bit more detail at the end of October when those come out. Or maybe I'll even have a chance to swing by and see them at Essen if they're there.
Very possibly. My first sort of news game is on GameFound, so also a crowdfunder. And it is a sequel to Gentes of sorts called Epos. And so same designer, Stefan Risthaus, and published also by Spielworks. And I don't know if you've played Gentes at all.
I've not. I think I saw it played.
It came out. It was another Kickstarter. I think it was a big deluxified edition and the normal edition. And I played it and I was pretty wowed by it. And I played it again and I still really liked it. But then I was keeping an eye out for the deluxe version at a reasonable price, and it never came up. And now this has kind of popped up. And I'll be honest, I can't tell you 100% how the game plays. I can tell you how the game ends. I think you've got 3 tracks with 2 people on the end of each track, and all 6 people are different, and you're trying to get them to touch. So you can move a worker from the right side of space, you can move a worker from the left side of space, and they might meet. Your left side worker might never move, your right side worker might move the whole way, but as long as they've met, that is the trigger for sort of ending the game once all 3 are kind of met in the middle. And you do different things with each of the sort of abilities to move along. And I just remember having a very good time playing it, and then this came out, and I had a look at. It's the same core mechanism. So if you've played Gentes, it looks the same, but they've adapted some of the building elements. So getting out on the map was quite tough, and getting your upgrades and stuff was quite tough. So they made that a little more, maybe not easier is the word, but you're capable of doing a bit more in the game, and your presence on the board makes a bit more of a difference. There's a whole bunch of designers' diaries talking about it, and they're actually updating all that on GameFound right now if you want to see what all those differences are. And I was going to back it, and then I looked at the price, and just compared to particularly original Gentes on Kickstarter, which was a much better price, and looking at all the pieces, I'm just like, this is it's about £20 too much. Like it's an €80 game with 20 euro shipping, and if it was a €60 game with 20 euro shipping, I'd have no problems with it. Now, as things stand, I'm currently backing it. I'll have a look at it at the end, make sure it's really something I'm going to get to play. Shelf space at a premium, and it does feel just slightly, cost wise, just crept up in a way that doesn't look as good value for money as the original deluxe version. But the game is it was a good thinky game. It was crunchy. When you play a crunchy game for the first time, you don't 100% grok everything, and the second time or third time you play it, you have what you're doing a little more, and it still flows well, and it's still an interesting decision space. And that was what I found with Gentes, and this is pretty much the same but different, a 2.0 almost, with the refined mechanisms.
That was what I was going to ask. Does it feel just like a sort of a revised edition?
It was. I think they were looking at ways of potentially upgrading to Epos, but the map and the buildings and stuff were so different that it wasn't really possible. And he was thinking about just calling it, second edition, but it was different enough that those people that really like Gentes might not love the new edition, and so both versions are available. But anyway, as I say, I'm backing it just now. I'll have a close look on that last 24 hours, see how I feel at the time.
Well, interestingly, I'll have to go and have a look at it myself, only by dint of the fact that Spielworks, they tend to do Gentes is actually one that wound up being a lot more available. But typically Spielworks games are quite limited print runs, and getting involved in the campaigns is often the best way to get them, because they don't often have big retail releases. It's usually the case that some smaller, more niche hobby stores will back a retail pledge or something like that and have some for sale. So if it is interesting to you, if it is something that if you played Gentes and you like the sound of this, or you like the design, then definitely do check it out on GameFound, because Spielworks tend to be quite difficult to come by after the fact.
Fair enough. What else is new?
Well, this is one that and Barry's in charge of the news this week, apparently. I've been heads down. focused on Kickstarters arriving. I might mention those later. But we've got a slimmed down version of GMT that was accidentally announced. What's this about?
No, it wasn't accidentally, but one of those leaks in quotes or leaks from the studio, because it was Tony Boydell published it on Board Game Geek, so hard to accidentally post that with a whole new image and vague description of what it is. But yes, a new version of Great Western Trail El Paso. And like I said, they don't know a huge amount, but it isn't a dual game, right? It's definitely not a 2-player game at least as far as I can tell. It is a full 4-player game, but slimmed down, faster. Also comes with a solo mode, so 1 to 4 players in the box. And
do the other Great Western Trails have solo mode?
There is a solo mode, I'm sure. I don't own it, so I've not played.
But is it official or is it?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like there's a deck of cards in one of them at least. Now again, I wasn't a huge fan of Great Western Trail the first time I played it, but this is one of the cases where if Sam or Ben teach me a game, I don't like it because they're not good at teaching games. And then when I go back and play it myself, actually, I quite enjoy it. So I have played a bit more of the second edition now, and I quite like it. I'm still not in love with it, so I can't put all the blame on Sam and Ben. But from what I've heard as well,
do we want to use pseudonyms for our friends so we're not outing them on the podcast?
I don't feel like Sam. You can track down a Sam or a Ben from a first name. For all we know, they are pseudonyms. They definitely have to be called out for being terrible at teaching games. And anyway, I believe that the New Zealand version of Great Western Trail gets a lot of praise for being a bit better than the core or the first or the second edition normal one. And so if this is again a refinement of that and speeds it up a little bit, I don't think the game is too long. It's no Boon Lake, I'll put it that way. But it was still, I'd be up for a littler game of it. I think I'd like that more.
Well, interestingly, looking at the El Paso box, there doesn't seem to be any cards in it, or like there's 4 cards. So I do wonder how it's sort of fundamentally changed, because obviously Great Western Trail.
There could be a second page of components, though, to be fair.
Oh, that's true. We don't know how complete this is. And actually, I wouldn't be surprised if there was, because this does look like a very minimum number of components.
Yeah, that would not be a lot of... I don't know. Maybe. You've got your player boards, which seem to track a lot more. That could be tracking how many of each
carry you have.
Anyway, it looked interesting.
Keep an eye on for that and see how that comes out.
And that will almost certainly be coming to retail.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be surprised actually if this was intended for an Essen release. It says autumn here, so that's very often the case.
Essen-y. Other games announced for existing lines. By the way, my segues on point. People are always telling me you got the best segues. Is Unmatched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles if you grew up in the 80s. And the Unmatched series is a now very widespread head-to-head. Well, not head-to-head actually. One player now with the adventures. So technically, it's now a 1 to possibly like 6 player. At least 5 players in the adventure box. Card-driven combat game that area and positioning matters, and the cards do different things to help you move around the board or attack your opponents. And there's the original games where I want to say like what were the original games? Just like generic archer and generic warrior or something along those lines.
I think they always had a sort of a flavor of historical figures, but it was stuff like Little Red Riding Hood and Robin Hood and King Arthur. So a little bit
public
more
domain.
Sort of public domain historical figures, but without sort of without a particular IP.
And I believe the last set, the Shakespearean one, is quite well regarded out of the series as well. But then they got into Marvel and those IPs, and they've announced the Turtles one. And I quite like the Turtles. Grew up with the comics as well as the cartoons. This is in addition to also The Witcher, which is coming as well. But Turtles was kind of just announced. So they're very much pushing this as a whole system, and for, you can get as many expansions as you can handle. Turtles is the one that's most interesting to me.
Unmatched has gone pretty full on. So this is from Restoration Games, isn't it? Yeah. And do we know who designed it?
Yeah, there's like 5 different designers. So the original 2 people. So Rob Daviau was right. in the mix for the first one, and now there's like 5 designers on the box. So
that's right. And of course we know Rob Daviau from Pandemic Legacy. And the originals, they were sort of, these, I mean, the game itself is a sort of a skirmish game. Each box comes with certain maps. The maps are, a grid is a bit too generous. There's sort of spots on the board that you move along and move around. And each character has a set of bespoke cards that control their behaviors. And it's just a sort of a straight up fighter game, almost like, the most minimalistic skirmish, where you will have one, maybe slightly more characters. I think, for example, they did Jurassic Park, which was the park ranger versus a number of velociraptors. And Robin Hood, I think, had some merry men that would support him.
Yeah, certainly sidekicks in the game as well. And
yeah, exactly. They're not fully fledged characters, and it certainly doesn't feel like a skirmish game, but it adds a bit more to the positioning, and they can sort of choose to control the other pieces, and they're using them to make the opponent's movement more restricted or challenging. And I've played Unmatched a few times. I've never owned it. I've enjoyed the games of it I've played. It's fast, it's punchy, it's, quick and easy to learn. But I find that, if I remember correctly, the round-to-round system is very simple. It's sort of like play a card, draw a card, and you have a hand of 2 or 3 cards. And I found that sometimes the cards were sort of very restrictive, and I didn't feel like the scope of my choices was quite enough to warrant a huge amount of Unmatched, which is now what exists. In fact, there's so much Unmatched that Restoration Games had an Unmatched Kickstarter, which was only a storage solution for Unmatched.
And I believe it was also not a great storage solution. I made it take up more space.
Oh gosh!
Because every mini and set of cards had their own box, and then there was a load of space around the mini and the box, and so everything took up even more space than just storing them in the original boxes.
Well, that's not a solution, is it?
It is. It's not a good solution. But it definitely worked.
A storage alternative. But so there were, and then of course what happened as well was that they lost some of the original licenses they had. So there were certain sets, notably the
Deadpool and Bruce Lee
sets that were going for like crazy money on the secondhand market because people are very completionist. I don't know if, and there was the limited edition Jurassic Park one as well that came with Jeff Goldblum that people wanted, but I never felt the need to own it. And
it falls into the area of like a lot of games, not necessarily minis or skirmish games, but like 2-player in particular. Same as played it around the same time as Dice Throwing, and while it's a very different games in terms of what they do, it's the same feeling in terms of going head to head or even 2 or 3 way combat type or direct confrontation, card driven direct confrontation cards. And I've also got a whole bunch of actual just card games that I'd rather play. So,
well, and I do know some people who, like particularly couples, where there's a different level of interest in the hobby across the partnership, and Unmatched has been quite a good fit because it's got the co-op mode now, so you can cooperate and learn to play together. and then you can do the head-to-head. And one of the things that I find detracts from the game for me, which is this sort of very limited scope of choice you have round to round by dint of the small hand size, actually works quite well in leveling the playing field as well, if your partner's not as into gaming as you are. So it can create quite close games, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
You do want, best head-to-head skirmish game is going to be a close one.
Agreed.
All right. Speaking of 2-player games, Barry, is there another one? There
certainly is. And again, this is another game that I wasn't originally. So this is another sequel, part of a chain, part of a franchise. And another game I wasn't particularly hot on the first time I played it. Or the second time, or any time thereafter. But I am excited by this one, and it's Everdell Duo. So that is published by Starling Games, designed by James and Clarissa Wilson. And it is a 2-player version of the very popular Everdell, and all the 6 expansions for that, and Farshore. But this one is a 2-player only version of the game. It looks quite similar, in part because they're reusing some of the art. But this game has a competitive feature, same as the normal base game. But there's also a co-op campaign. I think it's a short campaign, maybe like 6 scenarios to go through. And play cooperatively. So where you just said for Unmatched that it was a great equalizer, well, not an equalizer, but getting partners interested as well with the co-op to then build up into a more competitive nature, perhaps. This has the same thing, and I'm a big fan of the 2-player versions of games that have been coming out. I hope this isn't just like some of them definitely are just cash grabs and just everybody else is doing it, so I'll do it. But you've got Splendor Duo kind of started the trend, I would say, and carried into Quack's Duo, into King of Tokyo Duo, which we spoke about last episode, and then into this Everdell Duo, among many others, which have gone into this sort of 2-player only small box version. But they've had to make changes, and they've had to make it interesting, and those that succeed do make the game arguably better. Splendor Duo, I would say, is a better game than Splendor. You played a lot of Everdell?
I've played a lot of Everdell up until the 2 latest expansions. I haven't played Farshore, and I haven't played the 2 expansions that came with the complete enormous Everdell tombstone. But I enjoy Everdell reasonably. I think it might have got a bit out of hand.
Yeah, the people who have played with it have everything. They've got their favourite expansions, and they won't play with the other bits, and they'll play with the bits that they like. Okay, that's fair enough. I mostly only played core set, and then I bought the app. So I played a lot of the core set on the app. And I appreciate it a bit more, but I'm not massively enthused by it. But I do like the core tableau building, resource gathering elements, both in that game and in other games. So I'm optimistic for this one.
Well, when they came out with the first triptych of expansions, which was Pearlbrook, Spirecrest, and Belfair, I immediately threw them all in and played them together. And I haven't actually gone back and made an effort to explore them individually. But I was talking to someone who was playing it at the club last week, and they were saying that they were playing only with Spirecrest. And they were saying they found the event cards very, very mean. And I can see that. There are these event cards, one of which is the event that comes up at the end of the first sort of season when somebody progresses along to it. And it shuts off your first green income, which is wild because there's only 2 green incomes for the whole game.
Right, yeah.
So to have that shut down without really getting access to the benefits of the Spirecrest expansion, which are these asymmetrical cards that you'll then be able to draft in order to improve your powers in some way. Specifically, they gave you the giant animal creatures that you could ride around on. So you'd get like sort of a super worker, which was really just a worker that was fit onto the back of this big wooden meeple, and that was fun. But this could punish you before you gain access to that. And so there was this sort of interesting sense that Spirecrest on its own was quite mean and quite sort of reduced the scope of the game, or the scope of players to do well in the game. I've not had that experience, but I've only played Spirecrest with Pearlbrook and Belfair, and I found as a sort of a set of expansions, they gave the game more options. They sort of opened up more avenues. I liked them as a complete set, and I didn't feel like Spirecrest as part of that was especially limiting or mean. But I could see how it might be on its own.
Fair enough. I know my friend that has them all. I think he won't play with Pearlbrook.
Interesting.
Sometimes throw in the other ones. So who knows?
I wonder why Pearlbrook would be omitted.
What does it add? Does it add the river?
The frog and the river spaces, yeah.
Yeah, it was something to do with the rivers. I can't remember what.
Oh, fair enough.
Any scoops? Got any scoops, Mike?
Yeah. So I've got a big old scoop for you. I'm going to share this news with you, Barry, now when we're recording, while it's still under embargo.
Whoa.
Which is what?
I'll not listen. I'll stick my fingers in my ears. Don't worry.
Yeah, you signed that NDA I sent you.
I certainly did.
But we have spoken about iconic games previously on the podcast. We've mentioned their game 1% and Evil Dead 1%.
Well, they live the glasses, the polarizing glasses at the expo. I was
That's right.
impressed
in the UKGE episodes, we saw that stuff. So iconic games have secured the rights to produce a Tomb Raider board game.
Whoa.
Has there been a Tomb Raider board game?
There's a collectible card game. There's the 2019 board game. There's the 2009 board game, 2011 board game.
So, there's been quite a number of Tomb Raider board games, but this is a new one. And this one promises to evoke the puzzly nature of the original PlayStation games. Which, if you remember, Tomb Raider was, of course, very much about two things: solving puzzles and fighting dinosaurs.
Yeah, definitely dinosaurs. I'm most of the way through the first remake. So I think it was just called Tomb Raider again.
Yes.
I'm not 100% sure.
I didn't play it. I've seen it played.
Well, they're all on Xbox Game Pass, and so I had it on Steam for ages because you've just got a million games on Steam that you never play. And played it a little bit, and then I played it again on Xbox recently, but the camera is a little unwieldy, makes me a little motion sick. I think I'm maybe like 65% of the way through the game, and I just don't know if I'm going to be able to finish it.
I see. Well, the new ones are a lot more sort of cinematic and plot heavy, plot oriented. The original PlayStation games, and I mean, this is my impressions having not played the new ones, but from what I've seen, they definitely seem to focus a lot more. They've got more cinematics. The originals didn't really have many cinematics, if I remember correctly, because it's been many years since I played.
Just the start and end of levels, really. Just here's a guy to shoot.
Some plot about how you returned to your ancestral mansion and found some documentation from your father or something. Didn't she have a huge mansion, family mansion? Yeah,
Croft Manor.
Yeah, she went off on an adventure to find whatever artifact it was that her father had been looking for, something like that. So anyway, this promises to really focus on the sort of the puzzle-solving nature of the original game. It's supposed to really, they said it focused quite a lot on the sort of the one-player aspect of it, because Tomb Raider is typically, Lara Croft is typically on her own. But they did say it plays up to 4, so I don't really know what that means, but you'll have to wait, I think, to find out even more than that, because the game will be coming to crowdfunding next year. So this is really a very sort of early scoop that's something to keep your eye out for if you are a fan of the original PlayStation Tomb Raider games.
Nice. Well, that's it for the news, I would say, but I have a bit of a confession, Mike.
Uh-oh. I'll get my credentials. Hang on. My robe's on.
Yeah. Forgive me for I have sinned. Yeah. You're not already wearing them? Obviously, the past 7 episodes I'm really trying to play the games that I have. Not buying any games, trying not to buy any games, regretting the games that I bought. I've gone absolutely off the deep end since we last spoke.
You fell off the wagon.
I have fallen off the wagon, and I've fallen off the wagon hard. I'm just going to very quickly list you a whole bunch of games that I might hope to talk about in the future, because I have just bought a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't really need to. So Dominion upgrade pack, still playing Dominion on the regular. So Guilds and Cornucopia upgrade pack. I've just been picking up the second edition ones for the first edition things that I've had, and that continues. I'm always playing the unlock games. I stopped playing the exit games. I still play the unlock games. And so Unlock 12 and the next 3 shorts I bought. War of the Ring, the card game. I was always going to get that anyway, Fire and Swords. I got that pre-ordered now. Bus, do you own Bus?
So
we spoke about Splatter games. It was off the back of your recommendation. I'm sure I bought this.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy to recommend Bus. I played it not that long ago. I don't have my own copy, so I'm very excited that it is getting a reprint this year. I've also pre-ordered it, so that is coming from Capstone. Yeah, but no, Bus is excellent. It is just like other Splatter games, very mean and very much about sort of reading the board state, denying opportunities to your opponents, and getting those opportunities for yourself. But unlike a lot of their other games, this is definitely on the lighter end. It's easier to learn. It's very quick to play. You can probably play 4 or 5 players in under 2 hours easy, and probably even shorter once everyone's across the game.
Yep.
Bus is excellent.
Nice. Hopefully won't regret that one. Then I bought the Invincible Hero Building bag game. I saw that at the expo. It was in the secret Asmodee bits. Looked quite interesting, and then the more I've seen of it, the more I'm like, yeah, I want to give that a play. What I should be doing is playing games instead of buying them, but I bought this one. The new Mandalorian adventure kind of co-op book game. Bought that. Big fan of Baby Yoda's, obviously in the background here in every video. And so the opportunity to rescue him was too much. Keeping up to date with Arkham Horror card game with the Midwinter Gala. Keeping up with Marvel Champions with the Iceman and Jubilee packs and Magneto when it comes out. I've also bought the Arkham Horror RPG starter and core rulebook. Playing a few more RPGs. So I've got that, Call of Cthulhu Adventures, the Alien RPG core, the Blade Runner RPG core, the One Ring RPG core, big on the Free League publishing at the moment. I've bought the new Bloomborough Magic the Gathering set Commanders. I've got Quack's Duel still to come. It's been held up by Iceman. I bought Mr. President, which was just somebody offered it on Facebook, and I'm like, yeah, I'm having that. I don't need it. When am I going to get a chance to play that? I've still not played the Plum Island Horror from GMT, so getting another massive solo game, Mr. President, to the table, is going to be Christmas by the time I get that played properly. Also pre-ordered Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth, which is Seven Wonders Duel reprint. I bought the Castles of Burgundy acrylic tiles in their latest crowdfunder because I didn't buy it the first time. But Castles of Burgundy is one of my favourite games. And I just, for completeness' sake, I'll get those little bits of acrylic. They make absolutely no difference to the game. I already had the Vineyard acrylics. It's just really the extra bits I'm paying for. Don't know why I'm doing it. And also picked up SideQuest Nemesis, but they've also announced SideQuest
Isle of Cats.
Isle of Cats, yeah.
Yeah. Just on the subject of Castles of Burgundy, I had the deep joy of introducing Mark Dainty from Not Board Gaming to Castles of Burgundy. We played 4 players. Did I talk about this game?
No, I don't think.
So we threw in all the expansions. This is the Awaken Realms special edition, so it's the massive box with all the bells and whistles from Awaken Realms, which I picked up. I really like Castles of Burgundy as well. I'm always happy to play it. And so I think it scales really well at player counts, which is quite a rare treat. Even though the 4-player game can be quite long, it doesn't feel long because you're so invested in what's happening all the time. But there is a little expansion in the special edition that I've not seen before. We did play it on the show. So, I mean, I have seen it before. What I meant was I hadn't seen it before the big special edition. But we played it on the show, Michael and I, and it was sort of an impulsive thing back when we had the scope for impulsive live streams. And we just decided to do it. And I wasn't across everything, and I got a whole ton of rules wrong, Barry. But they're all listed in the description of that video. I've taken full acknowledgement. Now, the one a really positive outcome of that live stream. And we had a great time playing. And I don't think the game felt, although we played it incorrectly, it didn't feel that dissimilar to how it normally feels, despite us making a bunch of mistakes. But this did mean the other day I played it completely correctly. But the shields, have you played with the shields?
The Duchy shields.
Yeah, so the ones that you get when you roll doubles or manufacture doubles with workers.
No, I've not used it.
So these come in the special edition. They're little shields, and you put 2 in each depot during setup. And then whenever someone rolls doubles, they can take one of the 2 shields from the depot and put it on a castle in their kingdom. And then they must pay an upkeep at the end of every phase, and to maintain the shield. And it gives you an asymmetrical power, and it also gives you endgame scoring points, which could vary between 4 and 12. Now, Burgundy's a high-scoring game, right? Like, 12 is enough to make a difference, but, it's not a hugely significant number of points. It's a game that scores 150-ish, right? If you're playing with all of the expansions. Mm-hmm. I don't like those shields, Barry. They feel way too consequential.
Right.
There's specifically one of them that breaks this core rule, which is it lets you, your little warehouse where you store your 3 tiles, the key spots.
Yes, okay, fine. So you can only hold 3. And if you're playing with vineyards, maybe you can only hold 2 because vineyards are double.
Exactly
hexes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so it lets you store infinite hexes.
Yes. Which
just feels like it takes away one of those sort of key constraints of the game.
Yeah, that you have to be playing at a rate to be taking.
Yeah, and sort of being able to predict when people are going to be able to take things. Like, do I need to grab this thing I need right now? Who has the capacity to take it? Who's going to be interested in it? I feel like that's really important to be able to sort of gauge. And I think if you can just sort of infinitely, build up that area. I mean, it's not going to be a good strategy, but that kind of flexibility, I'm not a big fan of that sort of thing, really, when it breaks this core mechanism. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of things break, like a lot of the monasteries break the rules in less meaningful ways, I would say. But if you're only collecting tiles, let's say you collect all your tiles first and then you play all your tiles second, and you know exactly what you've got to plan it out, kind of deal. You're obviously giving up some of those early bonuses for completing areas in earlier rounds. And what's the upkeep cost you mentioned? Is that a significant?
At the end of each phase, right before you gain your income from the mines, you must pay 1 coin for each of these shields you have in your kingdom.
Okay.
And of course, they need to be stored on a castle, so you can only take as many as you have castles as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it does sound... I think it opens up some interesting strategies.
So there's another shield, which just doubles all of your monastery points at the end of the game.
That could be nuts.
Yeah, it was nuts. The player who took that won the game. And I think that my fundamental problem with the shields is that I feel like it changes the game in such a significant way that you have to be playing with people who know Castles of Burgundy well and then go through all 12 of them right at the start.
Yeah.
Because we sort of had this opinion where I was teaching some new players who were new to the game. They were quite happy to learn the whole thing. They wanted to go all in. But I said, okay, well, we'll just leave the shields. And then when you roll doubles, we'll check like the 2 you can access. Mm-hmm. Of course, I didn't forget, but I didn't even think about the fact that you could manufacture doubles using workers if you wanted.
Yeah.
So later on, when that became apparent and the power of the shields became apparent, suddenly we had to go back and review all of those, and it changed everything.
It sounds like a bit too much.
I think that they might be for people who've played so much Castles of Burgundy,
which is a lot of people.
Which is a lot of people, because there's a lot of it. But I'm just not really convinced by them. I think I'll probably be leaving them out for the foreseeable.
Well, I'll give it a go at some point, but I'm very happy with the base game and then the really small extras. And the vineyards I still want to explore a lot more. I've played a few games of that and gone all in on vineyards in one game and ignored it in another game, and they've always been close. So there's got to be some. I think vineyards was a very good addition. It just made it more interesting.
I like the vineyards a lot, but I also think that because the vineyards add so many opportunities for bonus actions, but the cost is very high because they take up 2/3 of your key spaces. I think that shield also lets when the way it interacts with the vineyards, it makes it even more powerful.
Agreed.
Anyway, that was my note on Castles of Burgundy. Still an excellent game, and I think they're closing the pledge manager for the reprint pretty soon. So if you were ever inclined to get it, it is a sweet new set, but don't forget, you can still buy it for like £35.
Yes, you can get the old version, cheap version. The old version was only like 20 quid at the time. It was a very good purchase for 20 quid.
Yeah, excellent purchase. You'll get your value for money. But if you are the kind of person that wants to get big fancy, table presence editions, then you can't go wrong with a classic like this.
That was my confession. As I say, I'm also still waiting on 4 Kickstarters, and I'm eyeing up even more. In particular, speaking of Awakened Realms, the Puerto Rico one, when it comes out, they've redone the front cover. It's no longer done by AI. So that's something. And I believe that Ra's getting the Pharaoh edition reprinted, which will be good instead of paying 250 quid for it.
Well, that falls into the same sort of camp, I think, as Castles of Burgundy. I picked up the Pharaoh edition of Ra when it was printed. That is, of course, from 25th Century Games, and it's designed by Reiner Knizia, Ra, the auction game. And the Pharaoh edition is the one that has all the wooden tiles and the metal coins, and it's got the giant Ra, like a whole wooden statuette that's largely unnecessary, but it's a beautiful edition. It's an excellent game, and I'm very happy to have it.
Nice. But in my defense, I have also been playing a number of games, so I have been getting more off the shelf as well. It's not just the collection aspect of the hobby. Been playing anything fun?
Well, why don't we start with one that's sort of sitting squarely in the middle of our played and used categories, which is Last Aurora. I brought that down to the club because I'd played it once and it was sitting on my shelf of games I should really play again before I get rid of them. Right. Because maybe it will change my mind.
I'll give you a $5.
So this is designed by Maro Chiaboto and published by Pendragon Games. And this was a Kickstarter, I think it was about 4 years ago, because I do believe that this delivered during the pandemic. And they are bringing back a revised edition to Kickstarter. And there are a number of notes in the forums for the game where Maro is talking about the changes that they've made to the design in order to sort of bring in this second edition. So it's worth noting, I've played it twice now, once at 2 and once at 4. It is a post-apocalyptic nuclear winter game. And it is kind of a tableau builder, BGG calls it worker placement. It really isn't. You are a convoy racing across the frozen wasteland in order to catch the Aurora, which is a ship that's setting sail for greener pastures. And you want to try to catch the Aurora before it goes. And so if you can get your convoy there ahead of everyone else, that'll be good for you to do. And round to round, really what it is it's a marketplace of cards, and each round is a set of phases. And first, everyone's going to get to draft cards from the marketplace. You're going to put that into your convoy, and then you will all move according to the speed of the convoy, and then possibly you'll all have to do some fighting as bandits and raiders show up and attack the convoy. And then we will repeat the whole process. And there's a little bit of tableau building because you've got a truck, that's the front of your convoy, and then you've got a number of containers attached to the back. And you can also attach devices to the top of the containers, which allow you to develop sort of different asymmetries. You need to collect bullets, food, and gasoline, with gasoline probably being the most important thing because you need to switch your convoy on in the movement phase. If you don't have any gas, then you just won't go anywhere and you'll have a bad time. But you've also got survivors, and the survivors are cards that you're going to use to collect more cards, but they're also represented by little meeples. So you have little meeples that you have to put onto the convoy, and they need to take up positions there for every card that you have in your survivor set. So you've got sort of managing this space in the convoy. The different containers will have different room on them. Some of them might have armor that protect them because you're going to get shot at, take damage. You also take radiation tokens that switch off the survivors. But in this opening round of every phase, you're going to take those survivor cards and you're going to use them to draft more cards from this rotating marketplace. And then they're going to go into sort of an exhausted area and take a couple of turns to cycle back into the ready area unless you feed them food, and then they can jump straight back into being ready. So there's this sort of resource management aspect, a little bit of asymmetrical power building. You start with 2 survivors, you can get many more. And it's got this kind of interesting scoring mechanism where the a good score in this game is like 12 or 15. Right. So very low points scoring. And there's a sort of a switch. If you get to the Aurora, if any player gets to the Aurora, then at the end of the game, you're going to get 3 or 4 points for your survivors. Specifically, it's going to look at the number of survivors in the convoy that are not irradiated, and you're going to get a point for each of those. They call it fame. Point.
Yeah.
If nobody made the convoy, if no one made the Aurora, effectively the convoys now thematically have to drive off into the sunset to find Eden or wherever it's going, the greener pastures. So now it's going to award you actually a point for every piece of your convoy, like the truck, the containers, everything there that's not damaged. So it's going to look for the bullet holes that you put out in those things as you get shot at. And for every piece that's undamaged, a point. So you could be building sort of different strategies around these things. But the biggest swing in the scoring is that the person in first is going to get a number of points equal to the distance between them and the player in last. So if you don't keep up, then you're going to be allowing that player in first to get potentially a lot of points. And so the scoring is a little interesting. There are also loot cards that you get for defeating raiders and bandits, and that can those are typically worth a point each. So if you decide to go down the route of a convoy that's filled, maybe not the fastest thing in the world, but filled with guns, then potentially you could earn points that way. But you still kind of need to keep up. Ultimately, it's a racing game. I've enjoyed my plays of this more than I probably should have. It is very novel in that the art's quite thematic. The sense of the game is quite thematic. There are some issues, particularly with the RNG of the bandits, because you've got like a shooting deck, you'll flip over cards, you can just miss outright, which is miserable.
Right.
Your gun can also jam and break down, and it's quite tricky to like get bullets, and then you need the bullets to turn on your guns, and so you spend this valuable resource, and then you just miss, and then you get nothing. Whereas if you hit, you get to step up a fame track. Although apparently that's changed in the revised edition. The famous points. You get step up points track. And if you hit, you might also have a chance to get objects, which are sort of like one-use items that can help you. And you might even have a chance of winning that loot card. Because it doesn't necessarily go to the person who killed the raiders. It doesn't necessarily go to the person who shot them most. But doing that increases your chances of winning the loot card, which is randomly distributed. So there's quite a lot of RNG in that process, which I think a lot of people bounced off of. And I can see why that would be quite frustrating. I don't think you can, and I think actually the combat's inconsistent enough that you shouldn't really focus on it as a strategy. You should really make sure that keeping up with everyone else is your primary goal. The board is also very small.
Right.
Like
although I believe the new version's going to update that slightly, right? Every
yes,
will be
So
numbered
the original had 2 boards. It had a third board as well, which is in an expansion, which I've never opened. I've got the expansion still in shrink, sad. But it had 2 boards, an alpha and a beta board, and I've never played the beta. I've only played the alpha board twice. The beta board does some interesting things that I would be keen to look at, but I think that it'll be hard to get back to the table this game. Just by dint of the fact that I think there's not enough sort of compelling elements overall that will bring people back to it. The new revised edition has a modular racetrack. So the racetrack is 3 areas. It's 3 areas in the original game, but now those 3 areas are separate pieces that can be flipped over. So you can use like half of the advanced side, or I think possibly you can move certain pieces around. It's going to be another crowdfunding endeavor. So I imagine that more modular map tiles will make a pretty solid, stretch goal incentive. So I'm sure we'll see some more of those in that crowdfunding campaign. But it's sort of an odd and novel game. And I think it appeals to me because it's quite unusual and quite weird. And I also don't mind some RNG. But I appreciate that. I think it's quite heavy, like particularly it's got a lot of cards. The cards are not well detailed in the original rulebook. Hopefully that'll be fixed in the revised edition. But it is a game where you could spend a lot of time with your head down, just looking things up, despite the fact that actually the feel of the game, once all said and done, is that it's a very light and quite silly romp.
Fair enough. You've talked me out of it.
Sad.
Well, in part, like, it was the theme that attracted me more than anything, as well as it looked interesting. I didn't know enough about it. I hadn't played it. I should really do some more research on these things before deciding whether or not I'm going to buy them. But the theme, I guess, is fulfilled for me by 51st State. I really like 51st State, the card game. I also have, Outlive, we're not playing for that theme. Z-Apocalypse, I'm getting rid of. And so I guess the theme itself's not enough to attract me. And if the mechanisms aren't quite interesting enough to repeatedly get to the table, at this point, I don't have space for it. So,
yeah,
and certainly not with all the stuff I've bought coming.
Yeah, I think that if you've got the 51st State Ultimate set, then that will probably be a better shout most of the time. I mean, it's a little different because it's a tableau builder, and it's quite a solitary tableau builder at that, with a few modules in the big box that add a little bit more player interaction. But I've hardly explored enough of that myself, and I'd actually like to play that more too. I think that, the last Aurora, it is the kind of game that appeals to someone who plays a lot of games because it's a little odd and a little different. But I think that it will be a hard sell to a gaming group, and probably also, and at 4, there was just a bit too much downtime. And I don't think it's going to find that sweet spot of player count, because at 4, the actual race element and keeping track of everyone was great. But at 4, the downtime was too high. At 2, no real downtime, but I took a big lead on the other player, and they were never able to catch up.
Right.
In the 4-player game, there was more of a catch-up. One player had fallen quite far behind, but got a very good truck later in the game and was able to catch up. So that wasn't as much of an issue there, but then at 4, the downtime was a bit more of an issue, and there wasn't quite enough going on other people's turns. So, yeah.
Fair enough. I'm going to try and get to a cafe and play that game in particular, last Aurora in particular. I'd still like to give it a go, but I'm not going to go out and buy it immediately.
Yeah, if you get a chance to play it, it's not that long. You can easily get it done in 90 minutes. I say that so long as someone knows how to play. Again, It's got that
watch
thing
a video
where
beforehand.
Watch a video beforehand or something. And also, you'll have less of an issue if it's not the Kickstarter edition, which came with all the extra cards, and now you have to look up the errata to check what they do. No, nobody wants that.
Fair enough.
All right, Barry, what's next?
Well, a game I wanted to play at the Games Expo, and one that was fairly popular doing the rounds while we were there, was Middle Ages. So that's a game designed by Marc Andre and published by Studio H.
Is that Marc Andre of Splendor fame?
Yeah, that sounds right. So Middle Ages is a tile drafting, tableau building type game. It's quite reminiscent of King Domino, but you're only drafting one thing at a time, or one half of a tile at a time. So you're just drafting a tile, and then once you take your tile, you then go on to the next row, and depending on whether you're first, second, third, or fourth, you'll get the pick of the next row as it goes down. What's the best way of explaining that?
Is it like the King Domino form of drafting?
Yeah. So the tiles are arranged by value, same as King Domino, and the better tiles have higher numbers. So if you've picked a better tile, you'll get a later pick in the next round, the round that comes up after that one.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. If you played King Domino, it makes sense. If not, I've probably not explained it very well. And you've basically got a tableau that has 6 different elements on it, whether that's farms, towers, the church, all these things. And whenever you take a tile, you put it into that column, and you'll get the effect on that column. And so if it was a farm, for example, you might generate a food for every windmill that you had, or every mill that you had. And the things that each column of tiles generates can be improved if you get some of the upgrade tokens. So now, instead of getting a food for every, or a coin for every mill, I would get a coin for every mill and every farm that I had. So it would kind of compound itself there. And then there's ways to attack other players. One of the tiles, if you put it down, if they have fewer towers than your attack, they would have to lose their first left tile, which was the farms. And if they didn't have a farm, then they'd have to lose a mill. And if they didn't have a mill, then they'd have to lose a village. It's basically the furthest left and highest tile, because you always build up in each column. And you're going to go around and around and around, just picking tiles and placing them down and doing the effect on the tile and in the column that you've picked, until eventually the end of the game. Then there's some main game scoring. If you don't have all of the different types, you'll lose 10 points. But as long as you've got one of everything, you'll not take that penalty. And otherwise, it's the points that you have. So there's not a huge amount of end game scoring. There's a little bit, I think, for maybe churches. Or maybe churches get you upgrades. I can't remember. It was okay. It was not something I'm going to be rushing back to anytime soon. It's still sitting downstairs for the time being, so I might get another game in before hand it back. But it was a little less fun than it looked. Of those style of games, I would recommend King Domino Origins. So out of King Domino, Queen Domino, King Domino Origins, and Moon River, which has the same kind of that mechanism. The main thing, the drafting mechanism, is the interesting part. I'd recommend King Domino Origins if you've played any of the King Domino games.
Yep, I've played King Domino Origins. I've also played the originals. I like King Domino a lot. I think Origins is original King Domino with some optional modular extra bits as well.
Yeah, you can play standard King Domino with it,
yep.
But it does give you, mostly standard King Domino, because you still have the fires, the volcanoes. But I think it just has that bit more game. I've played a lot of King Domino on Board Game Arena, like just core King Domino. And I think Origins just twists it up enough. You can add in a couple of different levels of difficulty, depending on who you're playing with, and it's more interesting. You got a couple of extra interesting decisions about how you're going to score. That I think make it more worthwhile. Plus, I bought it for £8 out of game during their January sales.
Well, I picked up the original King Domino when it first came out, and I used to play it 4-player a lot in real life. I really like it at 4. I like how quick and mean it is. I think it's best at 4 because somebody has to take that thing that nobody wanted.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Whatever's left.
And then sometimes it doesn't fit because they've messed up the layout and they have to discard it, and it's sad. So I like King Domino a lot. I think it's a really great little drafting game.
There was one edge case we identified in Middle Ages that we didn't have, in the end we didn't have to look up the rules, when you claim so there's actually 5 tiles in a given row for a 4-player game. So you'll always have a choice, unlike Kingdom Row, where you have to take whatever dross is left if you're the last player. However, if you took I want to say it was the tower action, you got to reserve a tile in any future row, in fact. And it was unclear if they were all reserved and it was your go, would you get a tile? It didn't seem to be that the tile you reserved was the tile you had to take. So you could reserve one, meaning nobody else could go there. But if you'd gone down on a different tile, it wasn't clear whether you had to remove your reservation or you could block somebody from getting something in a given round. And so I didn't read the rules. I went off being taught the rules, which is
always risky.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like that seems like something that should be covered in the rules. But if you know the rule, let me know in the comments, and I'll know for next time.
My gut instinct would have been that if you reserve something using the tower, you would have to take it.
Either you'd have to take it, or if you took a different tile,
you would remove the reservation.
You'd have to remove your reservation. Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't clear. We just wanted to get on with the game, kind of thing. You know, it's one of those things that if it came up, sure, we'll look into it. But if it never comes up, we won't worry about it.
Oh, so it didn't actually matter.
In the end, it didn't actually come up, but it was a possibility we identified quite early on, and I'm sure it is covered in the rules. But some of the only half-read rules before you play.
Half the rulebook's all you need. The rest of it's just fluff.
Yeah, if it was important, they would have put it in the first half, you know?
Yeah. So I played an old game from 2007 called Container. This has had an expansion that came out later, and then it had, much later, a 10th anniversary giant spectacular edition. Containers designed by Franz Benno de Long and Thomas Ewart. It was published by Valley Games originally. The 10th anniversary edition was published by Mercury Games. They are both companies that are handled by one Kevin Nesbitt, who is the CEO of Mercury Games, a founding member of Valley Games, and the developer of Container. And Kevin has been all over the forums for Container and Container 10th anniversary edition going, what do you like about our game? What do you like about the different editions? If we were to make another edition, what would you like to see in it? And so this is an opportunity to revisit Container. Has it held up? Do we want another edition? And if so, who should be interested in it? So this is an auction game, an economic auction game. It is sort of very much abstracted away production and sales, because in Container, what you've got is a central island where each player is a company, and you have a company board in front of you, and there's a central island where you also have a company warehouse. And on your board, you're going to produce containers. You're also going to sell other people's containers, and then other people's boats are going to come and pick up containers from your board, sail them over to the central island, where they will then be auctioned off as a lot. And if you win the auction, you can put them into your warehouse on the island. So ultimately, what you're trying to do is fulfill a secret menu. You've got a secret objective card that's going to tell you just how much each of the 5 different colors of containers are worth to you. There is a 10-point container, which is the most valuable. There's also a 2-point container, which is the least valuable. And there's a 5 or 10-point container, which only becomes the greater value if you have one of each color. So you're encouraged to make the complete set. However, the additional twist is that whichever container color you have the most of, you will score no points for at all. So nice. You must try to, in a perfect world, you would have one of each color, a huge number of 2s, and then a slightly less huge number of 10s.
Yeah.
But of course, given that nobody really knows what anyone else is looking for, and it's really a game of action efficiency, the lots that show up on the island are going to be pretty random. And you're not really it's not going to be a perfect world where you can get exactly what you want. Round to round, you get, so the game ends when the supply of containers runs out in 2 colors. So there's some player agency over when the game will end. There are also a number of expansions. We didn't play with a single one of them, so this was very much just the base game. And what you're doing in the basic game is you've got your player board, which has factories and warehouses on it. And you can take on your turn 2 actions. And one of those actions can be to produce containers, in which case you check your factories. They're all different colors, and each factory produces 1 container in its matching color. And those go into an area where you set a price for them between 1 and 4 monies. You can also purchase containers, but you must purchase them from other players, in which case you pay them the money for the prices they've set, and you take their containers and put them into your warehouses, which is also a seafront, a dock. And when you do that, you get to set the prices for those containers. You cannot put your own containers from your own factories onto the docks, because why would you want to sell the stuff that you make? You've already got it.
Yeah.
Right? Don't worry.
Makes sense to me.
Someone already came and bought all your stuff, so now you can't sell it yourself. You're out of stock. Better make more. And then you can sail your ship. And there are sort of 3 places the ship can be. It can be docked at the central island. It can be in the open ocean, which is basically just on the gaming table somewhere. That's not one of these other 2 positions. Or it can be at someone's harbor. And when you dock at someone's harbor, you also have the opportunity to buy the crates they've got for sale there, which are priced between 1 and 6. And so you can dock up there, and each ship can hold up to 5 containers. So you can buy those containers, and then you'll sail it back into the middle, which will trigger an auction. And when the auction happens, everybody announces how much money they have. They conceal money in their hands, and then this one-round blind bid happens for the lot, and the owner of the ship does not participate. But once the auction's over, the person who bid the most, the auctioneer will then have the chance to buy it back. So instead of taking the money from that person, you give them a matching amount. However, if you do sell the lot to another player, you take their money and a matching amount from the supply, which is a government subsidy for putting these goods back into the economy. And it is such a sort of compelling, puzzly little thing. It's an auction game. It's very deterministic. Like, theoretically, the most a 5 container point, I think, right? Now, if you're out there and you've played 100 games of container and I'm wrong, leave a comment down below because I'd love to hear from you. But I think the most a single set of containers can be worth to you really is 26 points. So and here's the thing, each coin is a point at the end as well. So if you spend 26 on a lot, if it's the perfect lot, you've just broken even. But if you bought it from someone, they're going to get 26 more points from the bank. So now you've given away too much. So you can be really calculational about it and really work out how much you should be paying for things. But I didn't pick up on a lot of those heuristics.
Until it was too late.
No, well, here's what happened, actually. I decided I'm going to build all the warehouses, because every time you build a factory or a warehouse, you have to pay money. And the amount escalates for every additional building. And I decided I'm going to build 5 warehouses and just be a shop front. I'm just going to buy containers from other people, and then I'll control the goods that are entering the system, and I can just make them the colors I want. That was my plan. And
How'd that work out?
Well, it worked out okay, but what's kind of amazing is that because I didn't get the heuristics around how to value the auctions quickly enough, I allowed an enormous amount of money to enter the system by accident. And then that really benefited me because I was selling the most containers and people were just coming and buying everything. So I ended up winning.
Yes.
So it really worked out. I had a great time. It only took about 90 minutes at 5 players. I think Container is brilliant, and I really hope they reprint it this year or next year. But I would keep your eyes out for it if that sounds like a fun time to you. It is economic, it is mathsy, but you don't need to be good at those things to do well at the game. And I think actually the game might even be better if some of the players are not being totally calculational.
The chumps, they're going to steamroll.
I had a great time playing Container.
Sounds a lot better than I don't know what I thought the game was necessarily. I actually thought it was to do with stacking containers, I think, in a shipyard. more than the actual shipping and auction parts. But I do like a good auction game. And that sounds very interesting.
What's next, Barry?
It's a great question. So getting rid of a few games, we've been playing some for the last hurrah. So one game I had been meaning to play for a while, but hadn't got around to, and it had been on sale for ages. Like, it went down again as cheap as about £8, give or take, depending on where you're buying it from, was XMen Mutant Insurrection. So this is a game designed by Richard Lonius and Brandon Perdue, published by FFG. And I always thought it was very similar. It was always sold to me as Marvel's version of Elder Sign. So the Yahtzee dice rolling game, where you go around, you send your little investigator around to do missions. You got to match the symbols on dice that you roll, and you get items that will help you do those things. And my understanding of it was almost just a reskin of it. And that is not strictly true. It's similar-ish mechanics and similar-ish looking cards, but it doesn't have the same feel by any stretch of the imagination. In the game, I just played solo, so I control 2 heroes. There's a random kind of setup for who you're fighting as the bad guy and what your mission is, and that changes sort of every game. There's 5 or 6 to choose from, so by the time you've gone through all those combinations, anything can happen, along with sort of like the nemesis, which is the boss, and the side scheme type deal there. And each hero has their own dice pool of red and blue dice, and each one does something slightly different, whether that's better at fighting, whether that's better at rolling different symbols on the cards. And each hero also has an assist card that you can play. You can either keep for yourself and use the dice on that, or you can give it to another player. So if you've got loads of blue dice and your partner has loads of red dice, you could swap your assists, and then they can get some blue dice into their pool and whatnot. And you'd have to go around and do these different things, these different missions, and then you'd roll the dice to try and match all the symbols up. And once you've matched all the symbols up, then you would complete that mission and move on. Failing to complete that mission, sometimes if you roll like a Magneto helmet, a bad thing would happen. Other cards like Sentinels can come out of the deck and attach to missions, making things harder or making rolling a Magneto symbol worse. You've got certain hit points. You can take hits and be damaged, which you can have to heal up again. And basically you just plod your way through to the end. And that was kind of what it felt like a bit. So
Elder Sign is a relatively lightweight cooperative game. Is this the same 2 designers?
So that was Richard Lonius and Kevin Wilson did Elder Sign.
So this is Richard Lonius and Brandon Perdue. So
yes.
One designer in common. I've played Elder Sign quite a lot, particularly on the Windwalker challenge, which Ithaca, yeah, Ithaqua. Yeah. I think that's supposed to be quite a difficult one, but I bashed my head against that until I hated the game so much I had to get rid of it.
Fair enough.
I just found the dicey puzzle so random, and I was like, "This is so random. How come it's consistently beating me?"
Surely one time I get it right.
Surely one time I'd luck into a win.
Certainly Corset and the Streets of Arkham are very easy now. So doing the Omens of the Deep, Omens of the Pharaoh, the Wind, Omens of the Wind, Omens of Ice, is more interesting. The build up to it and whatnot. And I've also played an absolute ton on the app, which is the same but different. It's not 100% one-to-one with the game, with the physical game. But this, I enjoy it. I've got all of Elder Sign, and just at the start of the year, I got my hands on like every promo. It's all the stuff that only the FFG Arkham Knights.
But it's out of print now, isn't it?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware. But I've now got a complete set, and I've done things like make-up adventures, and I've segmented all my different monsters into, well, these are thematically classic monsters, your vampires and your mummies and your universal type monsters, and these are your Cthulhu monsters, and these are your Shub Niggurath monsters, and these are your yig monsters and like your snake monsters and whatnot. And I usually try and pull from a thematic set of monsters and stuff for the stories. And so like I've spent quite a lot of time playing it. It's not the best game by any stretch. It is random because you're rolling dice.
Super random.
Yeah, but by the time you've got all the items in there, the only thing I negatively reviewed on it was the epitaph cards, which was like a tiny little 5 or 6 cards that if you die, something bad happens, and I didn't like that for some reason. The rest of it is fine, but XMen Mutant Insurrection did not give me a similar feel of progression. Obviously, an Elder Sign, you're working your way down, sealing up the Ancient One, or if you're playing the later ones where you're gathering up supplies to go on a big mission towards defeating the bad guy. Whereas this was just kind of... I was playing it on probably easy mode, but managing the threat was never difficult. Completing the missions was never difficult. I took a ton of damage, but it was very easy to heal. And it was really just a case of going through the motions until I got to the end, and there was no fun to be had. So I understand how it ended up in the big bargain basement bin, and it's definitely not one I'm going to keep. I was thinking, I really like Elder Sign, even though I understand its shortcomings. I might really like this, and then no, it was not good.
Yeah, I've probably erased a lot of the Elder Sign trauma from my memory because I remember getting... Well, actually, no, I haven't, because I remember getting so frustrated with it. But I do seem to have an unexpected fondness for it now that I'm recalling it. I did play it on my own and largely just went through doing my little adventures there. But I would, if someone said, do you want to try it, but now it's XMen, I like XMen, I would have said, yes, that sounds great. Or at least, just as good. Yeah.
I don't know. Like there might be a bit more to it. Like there is definitely things. There was a couple of interesting ideas where if you end up with a bonded reward, you get a bonus for you and one other player. And then that bond can be broken, and then it's a negative for you and this other player until you're able to heal that bond. And there's things going on, but just none of it was interesting. And that's what I'm looking for, and particularly in a solo game. I either want like a well-defined puzzle that I've got to work my way through, or potentially, a high risk reward type thing, a push your luck element where I'm in control of deciding what to do. And just none of that was coming through in the game. The story also wasn't particularly interesting. I wasn't finding it difficult to manage the threat. I think I maybe got a little lucky, and a lot of the missions I had didn't have any proper bad stuff on it. Like all the bad stuff didn't happen until you're in the high threat levels. But then I kept coming across missions that would reduce my threat by 2, and so I'd recover 2 turns just by doing one mission, and it was so.
Oh, well, there we go. XMen Mutant Insurrection. Bummer.
Anything better than that's been played?
Well, I went back and revisited Northgard, Uncharted Lands, which is designed by Adrian Dinu and published by Studio H, because... Oh, damn, I just thought of a better segue. Speaking of random games, Barry, I just went back and revisited Northgard, Uncharted Lands, which is designed by Adrian Dinu and Studio H. And
what's so random about it?
It is based on the popular video game, and it has exploration, which reveals new tiles, and it has dice rolling combat, and also random enemies that pop out of the map as well.
I've played this video game. I did not make the connection.
There we go. Well, the video game is a little more like a simulator, right? If you've played those sort of traditional, like, Majesty or Settlers or Populous or something like that, where, you've got like sort of automated workers. This is exactly that. Now, in this, you can be a little bit more prescriptive. Like, I think in Majesty, you had to bribe the workers to do things. In Northgard, you just sort of set them to doing stuff, and then they just passively generate things. And what you're sort of in charge of is controlling certain roles that the workers might have, and also the military. and there are different avenues to victory. And what they've done is they've sort of taken that game, and it is Viking tribes. You're all different Viking tribes, and the tribes are all a bit asymmetrical. So, the clan of the goat is very good at generating resources and feeding people. The clan of the dragon get like sort of super powerful warriors, but they're quite difficult to create, and you have to sacrifice workers to maintain their power. And there's the clan of the snake, have this really powerful war chief. Everyone gets an asymmetrical war chief that has sort of different powers and things. So there's a lot going on in the video game and a lot of possibility for them to take that away and make a cool board game. And so they did fund it. This came out in 2022. It was crowdfunded. I backed it then. I got the Uncharted Lands edition, which is the sort of the full one that comes with 2 expansions. The expansions are very much mini modular expansions. One adding new lands, different kinds of lands to find, and more monsters, bigger, tougher monsters to find in those lands. And the other added the asymmetrical clans. So without it, everyone would have different colors, but they would all be functionally the exact same. With the expansion, you got those asymmetrical war chiefs, and you also got asymmetrical clan upgrades and starting cards that you could that would give you some extra flavor. And this is a game that, in theory, I really, really like. It's 4Xy in its board game implementation. So you've got a little bit of, you've got to hold territories on the board. And a big part of the video game is that every so often winter will come around, like a timed event. Winter will come around, and then you'll be able to generate a lot less food. You'll need a lot more wood. And so really you need to have spent other parts of the game building up a stockpile of resources in order to survive the winter. Military units injured in the winter heal less quickly, or maybe not at all. I can't quite remember. But anyway, that's all sort of abstracted away in the board game, where round to round, you've got like the sort of the action phase where everyone's doing stuff on the board. And then at the end of the round, you've got the winter phase where you have to pay some amount of resources as an upkeep, basically. And what you're doing round to round is you are effectively exploring the map. You're gaining resources from the territories you control. That's actually an income phase that happens at the end. But you're going to gain resources from the territories you control. You can fight each other. You can build buildings, and those buildings will give you potentially military power or more resources, incomes, and things like that. And you're going to do this through deck building. So everyone starts with a deck of crummy cards that let you do like one action. So you'll play your explore card, or you'll play your recruit one soldier card. And later on, you'll be able to get rid of those and get better cards. And those come from 2 places. One is a set of upgrade cards that you can purchase, and you'll only have those available if you have the War Chiefs expansion and you've included them. Otherwise, you're getting cards from one place, really, which is this development row. And what's kind of a neat concept in the game is that on your turn, you take these, you play a card to do an action, or you can do various different actions. You can do the action on the card. But you play a card. Or you can pass. And if you pass, you're out of the round, but then you get to take a card from the development row when you pass. So it's not unlike the timing in June Imperium, right? Like, when do you go to your reveal round to start buying cards from the offering? Except in Northgard, the offering will not be replaced. And so if you pass last, you will have last pick. And it could just be Bupkis. Sad for you. All of this, in theory, I really, really like. You also get this resource called Lore, which you can spend to ditch cards from your deck. You can discard cards, draw new cards, burn cards to trash. So you can really tailor your deck, provided you've got the Lore resource, which is very cool. I really like that. Where the game kind of fell on its face was 3 things. The first is that the monsters themselves that come out are just kind of annoying. They're worth a little bit of points if you kill them, but they tend to hop around between you and your enemy's territories. And really, actually, they would have worked better if it wasn't for the second problem, which is that the combat is really dicey, and the outcomes are never really good enough to justify the risk. So you can fight other people, you can fight the monsters, but preferably you would never do any fighting. You just kind of explore and build some buildings. And because the fighting is very expensive, it's very variable, and it doesn't ever feel worthwhile.
Gotcha. Another 4X where fighting's
not adequately rewarded
Yeah.
or incentivized. There is two victory conditions. One is you get to the end of round 8 and nobody has yet won, in which case we're going to count up all of our points and see who wins. However, if at the end of the round, after winter, somebody has control of 3 territories, and each of those 3 territories contain one of the large buildings, then they win. So there is a sort of incentive to, for example, if you control 2 large buildings, pass late, nip into somebody's territory, and take a building from them and win that way. And that should work really well and be really cool. But it's also possible that somebody can just be left in a really bad position or discover a monster sort of late in the round that just appears and then attacks them. And most of the monsters, by the way, don't actually attack. They just... So, to be clear, first off, because people are going to start commenting, monsters are a module. You can play without them entirely. Second, the monsters in the core game are relatively basic and not that bad. They're kind of more of just a nuisance. I haven't played with the monsters from the expansion, which is the really big stuff like the Jotuns and the Wyverns. So I can only imagine that they're worse. But there is a monster in the base game called the Fallen Valkyrie, which will come to your territory and beat up your army. And if you happen to have that happen to you late in the round, you won't have much chance to react to it. It could potentially make you vulnerable, and someone could come in and sweep away one of these big building objectives. And the game can end quite suddenly and quite unsatisfactorily as a result. Now, in its favor, we played at 5, and the downtime was fine, and everyone was quite engaged with the game, and we're all having a relatively good time. I managed to draft a card early from the development row in the first round, which was not unlike that tile I spoke of earlier from Castles of Burgundy. What it did was it was a card, and when I played it, I could just take a card from the development row and then forego the chance to get one when I passed. So it meant this whole timing consideration around when do I pass, like how many actions do I sack off to get a good card, was completely irrelevant. I wasn't concerned about it. Didn't matter though, didn't win the game because a creature popped up and just wiped me out in my best territory, and then somebody else took it, and I was never back in the game. All I managed to do was draft some mean cards and make everyone else have a slightly less good time. Having said that, so I feel like there was a really cool game here and a really fun game, but some of the card design just feels not very fun. The rewards for killing the creatures, again, I think it wouldn't have been an issue if the combat was maybe less risky. I don't understand why creatures roll dice in combat at all, because they have a sort of inherent strength that you have to beat, but then that could be plus up to 3 or 4 based on a dice roll. And I guess I wouldn't mind defeating them being a calculational thing. Yep. But I guess that's been done for reasons. Something must have come out in testing. But I just feel like it's one of those games where there's so much promise and it's really close to something cool, but the parts don't quite come together well. And like we said, the only reason to go to war with someone is if you think they're going to make this endgame victory condition, or you think you can. And in many cases, it's kind of hard to do anything about that.
Fair enough. My time with the video game was not long. And I do remember it looking more fun than I had playing it, kind of deal. It did feel very Settlers, which I liked back in the day, but then I never really got into it. So I better check my Steam library again. It's probably in there. Might give it a go, but the board game seems like something that's maybe better spending my time elsewhere.
Well, I'm just thinking, if you want sort of like creatures on a map, rolling dice for combat, there are so many good options out there that you could try. I would play Clash of Cultures over this. I would play Cthulhu Wars over this, albeit Cthulhu Wars has kind of a bigger buy-in because of the asymmetry. I would play Eclipse over this, although it's, again, longer. Northgard is very short and very quick to set up. I'd play Warpgate. It doesn't have dice, but it's got combat card-driven combat resolution, and Warpgate's incredibly tightly balanced, and you can play it in under 3 hours with 6 players. It's brilliant. Unfortunately, it's hard to find at the moment. So there's lots of other options that kind of give you that 4X feel with, combat and argy-bargy and a bit of randomness to the resolution that just do this stuff better. It is coming back to Kickstarter with a new expansion. I'll cast my eyes over it, but I think I feel like maybe if I played this a bunch of times with the same group, we might reach a place where we understood the sort of potential outcomes and the random elements well enough to sort of have a much more competitive game of it. But I don't think it's probably worth the investment it would take us to get there when there are other games that get you there faster, like the ones I just mentioned.
Fair enough. I have been playing more games. So I can't remember what you said for Northgard there. It wasn't quite perhaps what you expect, or what I expected. And another game that originally wasn't what I expected was Hyperborea. This looks like a dungeon crawler from the front cover, but instead it is a bag builder, cube pusher almost. It's much closer to, say, Vindication than it is to, or even actually Anno 1800 to some degree, than it is to a actual dungeon crawler. The cover looks like it's got an elf and a dwarf and a barbarian kind of thing on the front cover, and I always thought it was a dungeon crawler, and then I played it and I was like, this is nothing at all like what I thought it was, and I thought it was really good. And then I went back and played it again because my friend's getting rid of it, and I was like, well, actually I might take it off you, but I don't think I will. So this was designed by Andrea Chiarvesio and Pierluca Zizi, and it's the version we've got is published by Yamaya, which I think is defunct now. And I think somebody else picked it up afterwards. And the core part of the game is the bag building element of it. So there's six different colours of cubes in the game, each of which, might only be 5, each of which corresponds to a certain type of action. And then your player board has spaces for you to put those cubes in, and they've either got you either require 2 or 3 cubes to perform an action, and each of the 6 actions has 2 different ways to perform that action, and they're slightly different. So let's say one's move 2 units, 1 space, or one's move 1 unit, 2 spaces, and you pick what one you're kind of going for. But the aim of the game, the game's played out on a hexagonal map, and you've got your starting territories, and each faction is asymmetric and has their own starting territories. Then there's like an Eclipse style inner ring, and then a middle ring for the center. And you start with a couple of guys on the board, and then you're drawing 3 cubes from your bag, you're putting them into these action slots, and then taking those actions. So that could be move a unit a space, and the different territories require different movement values. It could be attack somebody on the space you're in. It could be utilize the action of a city on the hex you're on. It could be develop a technology. It could be gain another cube. It could be swap another cube. Remove a cube so you can take that action again type deal. And the way it kind of works is you start with maybe 1 cube of each colour. So I think it's 6. Actually, it might be 5. And you would take the cubes out and you would use all of those. You'd go back in, you'd take out another 3 cubes. If you've ever got fewer than 3 cubes, but not none, that's how many you get for that turn. And then on the turn where there's none left in your bag at all, you clear your board and put them all back in. And so timing having the right number of cubes to maximize your action is important. And there's a whole bunch of things that let you put cubes back in buy an extra cube to put in the bag. So you're constantly patting your bag on the table, feeling how many cubes you've got left at the end. So if I can get one more, I can maximise my next turn. Or I can draw 2 extra cubes this time, and that way I'll be able to put them all back in next time. And the aim of the game is to get to 12 points. And you'll get points you can buy points on your board. You can get technologies that will give you points. You can control areas that will give you points. And you can fight your opponents, which will get you points. But the opponents that you fight has to be even. So the first person you beat of somebody's worth a point. The second person you beat of somebody's not worth anything until you've got one of everybody's. So you'd have to defeat each of your opponents an equal number of times in order for a second of the same type to be worth anything. You may still want to fight somebody to take over the hex, but you're not earning points for it. So it's not a really great description of the game, but it's much more Euro than I was originally anticipating it being. All the combat's deterministic in this one. You just basically need to generate an attack and you'll defeat one unit or one bad guy or one monster in that space for each sword that you can produce. And then you can go into the city, and then when you take over the city, there's the little tile that will give you a bonus. Might be points, might be extra cubes that you can spend later. The technologies that you're building up, that's the other way of ending the game, I think. If you have 5 technologies, the game will also end. But it's whoever's got the most stars wins. The most points, I should say, wins. So you can trigger the end game by collecting 5 technologies, which I was pushing for really early on, and then we clarified the rules, and actually it was the number of points you had, and not just the first to end the game. So I had to quickly pivot and start getting points again. And I thought I'd won. I thought, right, there's no way anybody's anywhere near me, but you also get a point for every cube that you have at the end of the game. And one of the guys had just been amassing cubes every round, and so he ended up like 18 points worth of cubes, and I only had like 6. And I was like, I thought I was being really efficient with what I was doing, but actually I wasn't. And that was what ended up costing me the game by like 2 or 3 points or something, just by not paying attention and not being able to take that like middle city in the end as well, on the last round. And so I did enjoy my second game of it, but I wasn't as blown away as the first time I played, when it was a totally unique experience. It wasn't what I was thinking. It was very much plan ahead and plan what actions I'm going to take. Because once you start taking one action by putting a cube in it, you can't do the other action of that type until you've completed, or until you've removed the cubes from there. So you always think, well, do I need a fortification this turn, or do I need an attack this turn? I'm going to start building a fortification. I'll finish it on a subsequent turn. But that means I'm not going to be able to attack anybody, so I better hope nobody comes to attack me this turn. And it's interesting. I think it was relatively popular at the time, but I don't think I ever had a big audience. I think everybody thought it was quite well regarded for what it was doing, and I would happily play it any time, but I think it probably benefits from, again, repeated plays. Like, just with everything. The more you play it, the more you kind of understand the intricacies of the game, rather than just kind of pottering about doing a little bit of everything. But it's still in the sell pile, so I will probably not get a chance to play it very often.
There is also a hard-to-find expansion for
Hyperborea. No, never even seen it.
Never even seen an expansion.
Yeah, the Light and Shadow. Doesn't seem to add any new factions, but adds something, right?
It's supposed to add
more different enemies.
Modules, and some people are saying it's very good, and some people are saying that it's totally unbalanced.
Fair enough. And the core game is more than enough. I think that's hard to come by these days. I'm not sure it's getting reprinted either. But the front of the box just makes it look like it's a dungeon crawler, and it is very, very far from that. There's no heroes. You've got your unique faction power, but that's it.
Well, I like bag building. If I get a chance to give it a try, I'll have a crack at it.
I highly recommend giving it a try. If my mate was keeping it, I'd definitely play it again, but I have no space for it. So on the sell pile.
Well then, I will talk about a game we've already visited.
Yes, why, Mike? Why? What's new? What's exciting?
Well, I talked about this back in the UKGE debrief, because this was the darling of UKGE, the Windmill Valley, designed by Danny Garcia, published by Board and Dice. And I'm not going to go into all the rules again. We covered that on the previous podcast if you want to hear it in more detail. But fundamentally, this is a Euro game with lots of your standard sort of Euro flavors, resource management, sort of action management, combo building, and things like that. The chief novelty of Windmill Valley, which is a game about running a windmill in Holland and growing, acquiring, planting, and selling tulip bulbs, is that you have a player area which is 2 interlocking gears of different sizes. They will start off synchronized in one way and change synchronicity every time you turn them. And on your turn, they will advance a number of steps, which you have some control over. And so you are going to end up with two options, one from each gear. And so you will pick one gear to activate unless you've upgraded your gears, and then you might be able to do both. So that's the chief novelty, action selection on gears that are not totally synchronized. The rest of it, there's kind of a network building element on the main game board. There are asymmetrical powers you can build up. There are contracts you can acquire for endgame scoring. And the length of the game is also controlled somewhat by player agency, because every time your large wheel completes a rotation, you will advance up a track. And when you take 5 steps up the track, the game will end. And of course, depending on how many stops you're making, depending on how fast you're spinning the water wheel, will determine how quickly you advance up that track and somewhat determine the length of the game. So we played this at 4, and the kind of takeaway was that there's not quite enough going on, and the downtime was horrendous. And we were not really inspired. But I wanted to do my due diligence and play it again and try it at 2. So I got it back to the table. I played it at 2, and it was a much more enjoyable experience at 2 players. I'm still not completely inspired, but I can see where the sort of appeal of it is, because each action is relatively simple and straightforward. And so, but what it does is it combos an insane amount. It's sort of like just an ongoing bonanza of value pretty consistently. And I think that's something that we didn't really get the first play, partially because it's an engine builder to an extent, and you really need money in it. If you run out of money, it sucks. And if you don't know that, or you don't have a way to get money, you're going to have a bad time. And I think that's a detriment to the game, because you could get it out to play it with people. And I think if you didn't tell them, make sure you have a plan to earn some money somehow, or prioritize maybe taking action tiles that let you do a thing, but also give you some money, then they could wind up having a lot of turns where they're just like, I'm going to take 2 coins. All right, your turn. And that feels bad in a game where you can have a turn that's like, now I plant a flower. This lets me draft a new action tile. That triggers a foreign sale. And I sell this over here, which lets me plant 3 more tiles. And now I've got 5 points. And now I've got another money. And now I can do, it's just, you can get pretty significantly long chains going on. And if that kind of chaining of actions is something that you enjoy, I think there's a lot here for you to appreciate. And one of the reasons it does it well is because the actions are all individually fairly simple and straightforward. If the game were more complex, it might be a little bit too overwhelming. Having said that, I've played this when I played it 2, it was someone who's very into the hobby, very good at hobby games. And in most cases, I feel, or in that game, and to an extent, well, the other game is a bit different. We'll talk about that after. But the point is, in this game, it felt kind of like we both did everything we really needed to do by the end of the game, And I think it would have been great if it maybe ended sort of like 1 or 2 actions earlier. It would feel a bit like it felt like we were ambitious, but then we kind of delivered on what we aimed to deliver on. And so that was fine. In the 4-player game, there was way too much downtime. And what happened is the player who was most across it just picked up everything. And it meant that a lot of us didn't have access to the stuff we needed to improve our situations. And furthermore, we were taking a lot of those like turns where it was like, great, I'll get 2 or 3 coins, and now it's your turn. And in a game that was already having a downtime problem, that was pretty awful. So as a 2-player sort of puzzly, Euro-y, points bonanza, action combo-y affair, I think it fits into that niche. I think you'll probably have a pretty good time with it. I'm not sure if there's quite enough variability to the board setup to make it an evergreen game in your collection. But I think, to sort of scratch that itch from time to time, it's probably all right. But I wouldn't play it at more than 2 because I really don't see really what the extra players are adding when there are Euro games that vastly improve at 3 and 4 player count.
Gotcha. Well, I still not played Windmill Valley, but I did play Zokin yesterday, another game with gears, and that's still a lot of fun.
Zokin, classic.
Will I talk about role-playing games? Do you think people on the channel will be interested? Will we leave it open that people could say in the comments if they'd like me to discuss role-playing?
Barry's been playing a role-playing game.
Yeah, so I played Blade Runner RPG, which is Free League Publishing, and you'll notice that I went a little bit ham in my purchases on Free League Publishing, with buying the Blade Runner core set, the Alien core book, the One Ring core book, which were all Free League. I have the starter sets for them already, which I've played. But Blade Runner very much reignited an excitement for role-playing games. It was super the adventure that came in the starter kit, I can highly recommend. It is very self-contained. It is it gives you a real opportunity for playing as a Blade Runner. Now, the system probably will creak at the seams if you try and do anything else. But there's a real case there to solve. There's different ways of solving it, and it was more about how your actions... It wasn't actually solving the case. It was your thoughts and feelings towards how the people involved in that case, to some degree. People play as replicants. If you've seen the new Blade Runner movie, you'll know that the Nexus 9s, which Ryan Gosling's character, among others, are part of this. I don't think that's a hidden part of the story. Are Blade Runners and in this movie, and players can play as replicants or they can play as human proper. But what I discovered from playing Blade Runner was the whole lore around Blade Runner. Like I thought I knew Blade Runner. I did not know Blade Runner. I know nothing about Blade Runner before looking into this. There is a whole, like, what do you think a replicant is?
So I've seen the movie.
Yep.
I have not read any comics or books or other media that might exist. My understanding of replicants is that they are tools primarily used for off-world resource gathering who have superhuman attributes and as a result shortened lifespans.
To some degree correct, apart from what if I told you that they were functionally identical to humans. They obviously have some peak abilities, some inhibitions done, but they were in the future effectively, the Tyrell Corp figured out a way to make humans without requiring parents and not by cloning. And the whole rights around whether replicants should have rights or not is a core part of the whole ethos and mythos of Blade Runner, and particularly in the new movies where you can see the replicant underground and whatever else, and there's a whole lore there that is just not coming across in the films at all, and I never fully understood the ethical and moral elements of the film until I started looking into this. But anyway, I played the RPG, which is the core part, and it was really good. The system's super straightforward. The story's self-contained in the box set. Does give you the opportunity to do whatever you want with it, but it very much reignited my interest in playing RPGs. So if you want me to talk a bit more about that one or any other ones, I should probably say, but otherwise we'll keep it on board games, right?
But it doesn't tend to lend itself then to sort of long, ongoing D&D style campaigns, but more to these sort of shorter vignettes.
As open world. Like, you wouldn't want to really live in that world as the other part of it. Free League Publishing just finished another Kickstarter, which will have late pledges opened once the backer kit's kind of set up. For the other stories, or the newest stories, which also comes with a stretch goal of random bits and pieces that you can incorporate into your own cases. The game would only really work as Blade Runner stories and investigations. It is not, you're going to build up your own Tyrell or Wallace Corp, right? Mm-hmm. You're very much on the streets. You're very much struggling with the moral and ethical repercussions of what you're doing. The Nexus 6s were the only ones with a shortened lifespan. I'll give you more spoilers. There was only 2 Nexus 7s, which was Rachel from the first movie and Isabel Selwyn, who's somebody only from the comics, really. Then the Nexus 8s, which is what Ryan Gosling hunts down at the start of the movie. Again, spoilers. They are now kill on sight, effectively, because they are... The lore, which the movies never touch upon, is that every Replicant 8 was tracked until the blackout, when they kind of deleted everything off the server files and then tried to escape. And now everybody's like, well, we've got to hunt down all the Replicant 8s. And then the Wallace Corp bought all of Tyrell, which does come across in the movies, restarted up with Nexus 9s, and they're supposed to be infallible. But obviously from the films, you can decide whether they are or aren't yourself. And it's just, there's a huge world there that's only really been started to be developed by Free League because it was never really apparent in the films. And it's pretty interesting overall. But the thing you might care about is that the game is solid. The way of playing it's something, it's what I like about Call of Cthulhu with the investigation element. But it's also, it's a much more solid investigation system than that, or say even Gumshoe, which has Trail of Cthulhu. And there's still enough open possibilities that you can do different things. I'm running it again in a couple of weeks for a different group, and I'm looking forward to it.
Nice. Well, there we go. We'll get an update on how these sleuths do later. Now, I'm going to tease a couple of things before we move into our final game to discuss, and then that's going to be our episode. But I just wanted to mention that my copy of Arcs arrived, and I've got some games of Arcs already planned. People chomping at the bit, desperate to do the Blighted Reach campaign expansion, so we're keen to dive into that, figure out if it's everything it's cracked up to be. I have high expectations from Cole Worley. I've enjoyed most of his other offerings, so this is very exciting. And I've also got my copy of Slay the Spire, which I haven't had a chance to crack open yet, but I've heard good things about that too, so that's exciting. And I still need to play Primal the Awakening, but it's somewhat diminished because we played the tutorial, Mark and I, and it just didn't capture me. So now it's struggling to compete with these other things. Sad.
Too many games. Just too many games, Mike.
Too many games to play bad ones, Barry. That's why we have this show, to help the people.
You, the people.
All right, what's this last one then?
I wasn't even going to bother because then we'll end on a bum note, but as you wish. The game here again, the theme is getting rid of a bunch of games, so we're trying to give them their last hurrah. This is Legendary Creatures, a game designed by Eduardo Baraf and Christopher Ham, published by Pencil First Games, and it is, I don't even really know how to describe it, it's a tracks game which is powered by cards that you're playing from your hand, which have creatures on them. They're multi-use cards, and you're trying to pick up points by moving along these tracks and doing actions on the cards that you are playing. So on your turn, you have your deck. You're going to draw 4 cards from it. Everybody's deck's the same to start with, but obviously shuffled up. You're then going to pick 3 of those cards to play on any given turn. Everybody plays them face down. Discard the 4th one to a special area that triggers at the end of the round. Then everybody flips their cards over. Whoever has the highest value creature in the first position goes first. But but then you can use a card to either gain power, which you can use to spend on other things, to move along a track of your choice. You can only choose one track per turn to kind of move on, or trigger the ability on that card. And I think that's relatively accurate. So each card has these sort of 3 different things that you can do. And what you're really trying to do is set up little combos in your cards to get the furthest along the track, or to, for every wind card you've played this turn, gain 1 power or whatever it is. And you do that until your deck's empty. You can pick up there's some cards that are able to be bought as well, but after 4 turns or something, then you end that first round, and then every card that you've discarded, everybody flips those up, and whoever's got the highest value there gets some sort of bonus. And then you do that 3 times to complete the game. Whoever's got the most points by being effectively furthest along each of the tracks, which pick up points. You also get different resources for going along those tracks as well. And I imagine that the end would have been equally anticlimactic, but I finished that. We gave up after the first stage. I was bored out of my mind. It was very similar to other games of its ilk. It's straightforward. It's pick up play. It might sound interesting picking, one of the 3 abilities on your card, and setting up these combos, but it was not. And I couldn't really describe it any more than that. Like, if I was going to play something along the Veil of Eternity, I think has a similar feel for not being the same game. And yesterday I played Seasons a couple of times again, and I still had a really good time with that. It's in that vein. The multi-use cards are the most exciting part of it, but actually the tracks were very unexciting. And it kind of balanced out in a way where the whole game was just, I can't wait for this to be over. And so I don't think anybody was having a great time with it, but I was having a bad time with it, and so we just stopped after the first stage. And that was on the sale pile, and that is definitely going.
Oh, well, that's Legendary Creatures from 2018, and if you haven't heard about it, there's probably a reason.
Yeah, like I'd never even seen it before. I was like, oh, that looks cute. Nah, get it sold. 50 quid if anybody wants it.
And with that, we'll wrap up the episode 8 of the Ready Steady podcast. If you want to comment on anything you've heard here today, you can comment on the YouTube video version of this. You can also email us, askreadysteadypodcast@gmail.com. We will read your emails, although we do not promise to respond unless you're really nice and polite.
And if you want to see Ready Steady roleplay, let us know.
Yep, that'll be Barry-led, because I don't have any time for role-playing at the moment. We will, of course, I will be busy producing videos on the Ready Steady Play board game YouTube channel, which is supported by our Patreons, and big thanks to them. This content is a part of their support. So we're really appreciated to all of them and to all of you who have listened to the show today and spent your time with us. Thanks very much.
Until next time, bye.